And thank you to MoMA and all the curators, all the behind-the-scenes people. I'm so pleased to be here. I am in the liquidation business, but I started in the 60s on a retail floor, working in retail, and I fell in love with it. I fell in love with the excitement and with sharing it with people and really making people happy. And forgive me if I say women. That was all we were selling at that point in time. So I enjoyed it and have opened several different concepts after that until 1980 when we opened UAL, which is United Apparel Liquidators. But we opened it with the idea that we would take all of the analytics that we ran our stores with, the sourcing, and then combine it with a retail environment that was fun, just a specialty store environment with personal interaction with the customers, and making, a word that we hear all the time, an experience for the customers. So that took us 37 years. And what you're going to see are an assortment. When I started looking at all of my old pictures, photographs, going back to the 80s and earlier, I realized I was very proud of all of these people that I had had the pleasure of working with to mentor them and watch them grow and enjoy everything that they did for me while they worked for me. And then I was humbled because I was looking through and I saw letters of gratitude from them because somebody got a job at FedEx and she said, I'm in sales and I never would have been able to get that job without the training that you gave me. And one of the people that you'll see is now the sales manager for Chloe. We have one who was in sales for Valentino. Many of the ex-employees have opened their own business, whether it's in fashion or something else, but so many have told me that the experience they gained working directly under me, because I was such a fanatic about customer service, and they learned it from me. One of the ex-employees is living in Nashville now, and she actually sold me a condo last week. So that's a circle, a full circle. Anyway, we started with sales girls, and then the term changed to salespeople, and then it became associates, and now I have stylists working on the floor. And no matter what you call them, these are the hidden heroes, because to get up every morning to open the doors of that little store or big store or whatever, it's like show business. The curtain goes up, and you really have to make it fun. You have to make it special. You have to listen, and then you have to interpret. And whatever they want, you have to figure out the closest thing we have to it. And that's what you show them. And then, from start to finish. And those were the lessons that I taught all of the people that have worked alongside me. And it's been a lifetime of fun. It's always been thrilling to me, even with the ups and downs and the hard times, And like Stephen said, there's none more challenging than there is now with all the changes. But I was delighted to hear someone in the last panel talk about the athleisure and that the pendulum always swings. Right now I'm selling a lot of great athleisure clothes, but honestly, we'll all get back to at least having compartmentalized that part of our lives, and everything that we buy to go out or to go for interviews or hopefully even to go to work in retail. If you look good, it always helps. And the good news is that every single person is going to make a statement, and that's what fashion is. It's personal, and you're able to express oneself in the social strata. Whatever you're doing, you are making a presentation, and that's what I've always liked about it. But one of the other problems, speaking of hidden heroes, the lost art of retail. I talk about it all the time. I experience it all the time. And I could go through, in the week before I came here, every store, every restaurant, I would think about what I'm getting. Am I getting the kind of service that I would like? And I don't notice, and I don't think any of us notice, mediocrity. We accept it. What we do notice is the extremely happy, talented, knowledgeable server, whether it's food or clothing or anything, and you notice that because it's so outstanding. And you also notice the other end of the spectrum, the horror of our breakfast this morning. And, you know, it was sad, really sad, because you feel like, who hired her and why are they paying her? You know, she was just like anti-us, and we were the customer. So my people, I don't know if they're flashing. Look at these people. You know, really, I have the greatest ones now because I'm leaving. I'm not going to leave, but I'm easing out. And so we've kind of turned it over to the new generation. Thank you. And I'm happy to say they've taken us to new fronts, to new ideas, and they're going to take it to the next level, I think. I hope. Thank you.
Come take a seat, and you each have a microphone on your chairs. So this is one panel, I think, that at least every single person in the room here, no one showed up naked, so everyone is in some way connected to retail and circulation because you bought clothes to come here today, and I think that's a really immediate part of how we feel engaged in this topic. We have quite a short amount of time for Q&A before we move to the debate, and there are so many questions we could ask. I want to make sure I open it up to the audience after my first question. So I'm going to try and ask a question that will appeal to everybody. It's going to be one that I was going to keep for 2 or 3 down the line because it's quite thorny, but I'm interested to know about the ethics of consumption and how you all approach that in your day-to-day. Because no matter how we talk about it, we have been talking in each of these 4 presentations about consuming. And no matter which model we follow, we really are asking people to buy things. And there's not something inherently ethically wrong with that at all, but there are considerations to be made, and considerations that might have changed over the careers that you've had, Stephen or Melody, for example, where you've seen many different types of consumer. And then, Riad, the way that you're trying to think about the ethics of consumption in your particular model with Material World. And then, Susan, the thorny issues that you've talked about in your presentation, the ethics of consumption when we're thinking about knockoffs or young designers. There's a really wonderful, I have to quote it because I love it so much, there's a wonderful sentence in your book: Canal Street in Lower Manhattan, as the informed tourist knows, is perhaps the nation's most concentrated retail outlet. And you go on to say, for counterfeit merchandise and bootleg recordings. But so how do you each approach the ethics of consumption? And Stephen, maybe we'll just go in order of your presentation. Stephen, why don't you start?
Yeah, I mean, for me, it's present every day. I mean, it's present like with my kids, you know, when we're buying them stuff and I see that they're not wearing it, and it's just like, you know, it's just sort of an irritant. And then just from a business experience, just, you know, over the years, just seeing waste, just seeing so much stuff, and, you know, it's good for UAL. But no, it's just bad for business. So we're trying to really kind of tighten everything, you know, and change the model a little bit. I think that fashion in general is predicated on really doing these seasonal collections, and I think that for us as a brand, that's something that we're shifting, because with the seasonal collection, you're way in advance, kind of guessing what those items are going to be, and it's like going to Vegas and you're putting, you know, money on every single SKU in hopes that you're going to be right, and of course you're never right, but you hope to be more right than wrong, but that's not really a good system. you know, and so we're switching that, and we're now just releasing things, making smaller runs of different items, and you know, if something's great, then we'll make it again, and if something's not, then at least there's not so much waste.
Melody.
Well, the way I think we've addressed it is to encourage people to buy finer things. People have lost the appreciation for it, but if you buy something, whether it's on sale or not, and the quality is there, and the iconoclastic adaptation, everything that would make one want to hold on to it. And you can, because if you buy right, if you sell that type of thing at an affordable price, of course, it encourages people to keep it. And I should say that liquidation is like the ultimate recycler. You know, we've always said that it's a good way to keep it churning in the market.
And so, and your model also, Ria, is built on this idea of recycling, right?
Yeah, so I think when we think about the ethics, one thing I do believe is that, you know, we as an industry or the fashion brand or retailer can't tell the consumer what to buy and what not to buy, right? Like, it's really up to the consumer. But what we can do is really make it easier to be more sustainable. So a lot of our customers do want to be, you know, eco-friendly, but they also want to shop because they want to feel, you know, great, and they want to try new styles. So we're not saying don't shop. You know, we're saying there's a way to shop that's actually more sustainable and we can do it easier for you, right? If it's painful to take photos and list items yourself and ship it out in a box yourself, then use our service, because you just send it in, we'll take care of everything, and you can really focus on feeling good that your items have been passed on to someone, but you can focus on using that, you know, little income to then think about what new you can refresh your wardrobe with.
I'm totally fascinated also in the difference between brick and mortar and online, just before Susan answers the ethics question, because it's just on the tip of my tongue with what you're saying, Rie. So we're hearing recently that in Silicon Valley, people are banning their children from using iPads because they realize it's horribly addictive and we just get absolute pleasure from mindlessly saying yes to stuff online. And I'm totally, in fact, there has to be many studies, longitudinal, over maybe several generations, that tell us the differences and the similarities between what it is to have that haptic moment of touch in a store, where we understand this interaction with a sales associate, where we can smell it and touch it and try it on, and the pleasure sensors that go off in our brain there, and what happens when we swipe on a mobile and 4 hours later Amazon delivers it at our door. And so that, I think, is probably fodder for conversation over coffee, because I bet you there are people in the audience who know of many studies along these lines. But the ethics of those two models, I'm interested which one gives us the least possible consumption, or the most thoughtful consumption pattern, perhaps. And from a legal perspective, Susan, or from just an ethics of...
I truly was going to answer the ethical perspective, because I'm so grateful to our co-panelists for giving us good reasons to shop, Michelle. Right, this is great. But what I was going to say is that fashion is foremost, of course, a means of communication. It's an identity-bearing good. So for me, when I think about what I'm going to wear, and that old saw, you are what you wear, I want to make sure that what I put on reflects my ethics. And if I have a label next to my skin, maybe not next to my heart, but next to my spinal column at least, right? I want to know that it represents values that I appreciate. And so that would cut out knockoffs and counterfeits that lead me to these kinds of wonderful ways of experiencing post-consumer fashion, experiencing things that might otherwise go to a landfill, or merely going to a shop from someone I think is cool.
I have to say I agree with you like 99%, Susan, but then I think of Dapper Dan in the exhibition, the jackets that he has upstairs, and think about knockoff and appropriation as a form of subversion and resistance. And then, of course, also, as you so beautifully outline in your book, the idea of appropriation really affecting people in adverse ways. And Narcisco Rodriguez was a great example. I want to make sure that we finish on time, but also have time for audience Q&A. And so are there any questions out there that we can end with before we move to our debate? Anything that people would like to ask our panel? Thank you. You have a mic just coming.
Yeah. How do you guys all feel about fair trade, the fair trade label? Are you aware, for one, that fair trade has now gone into fashion? Most people think of it just as the coffee. That's how it started. But now, they're going into fashion and producing materials and making sure that they, the brands that want to work with them, have the label and make sure the practices are good for all the workers that are making the products. Are you guys encountering that? Or is it on your radar? Is it a thing? Does it matter?
Yeah, I mean, for me, I first encountered it I think 2 years ago. I was doing a collaboration with West Elm, and we went to India, and the whole premise of the collaboration was I wanted to work with factories actually that were making things by hand, which was a challenging thing to do, with a big company. And we went over there and we talked to them. We had a whole meeting about it, and I thought it was really interesting.
I think we're still in the early stages of many kinds of certification processes coming to the fore in fashion, and I think we'll absolutely see more of that carefully delineated, and what we mean, and how do we educate the consumer to understand what each one of those labels means. So I think that this is an ongoing project, actually, and a good one, so a good question.
I want to come for one last question, actually, just down here. Steph had a question. But it relates actually to what you were saying, Stephen, about limited drops and seasonality. One of our favorite parts of the exhibition was learning about the I-95 corridor and the way that pre-internet you had to travel to Baltimore or to Washington, D.C. or to New York to see the newest pair of Air Force Ones. You couldn't just swipe and buy. You had to go down, and there was this whole culture of dialogue, of showing off, of being there and being in part of that moment. I think, Steph, you were going to kind of gesture towards that too.
So every weekend, walking around in areas of downtown Manhattan, there are lines wrapped around buildings of people wanting to get into retail stores because there's this limited drop situation happening. Supreme, Kith, etc. Is this sort of the future that we're facing? Is this something that will sort of not revive retail, but really invigorate it, especially brick and mortar?
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of things, will invigorate. I mean, I think that the idea from a small retail perspective, really having special things, it sounds very, simple, but I mean, it's hard to execute because it really means doing more work and going around and finding really special products and then also selling them in a way where you can really romance them, assuming you believe in them and be able to articulate that to the customer. But as far as the limited drops, I think that there's been a lot of it, and I think that part of the problem with it is that people do it and then they get out of it and then they do it, and I feel like there's a little bit of numbness for the consumer because there's so much of it done. On the other hand, people like Supreme, are doing it so well, and they have the consumer there is just so tuned in, and it's like weekly drops. And for me, I got into the whole business. I mean, I raised money to open my first store by doing essentially the sneaker thing, but with Swatch watches. And I was going all over the world and buying limited edition Swatch watches, and then I was going to Italy and Switzerland and Japan and Hong Kong and selling them in bourses. And anyway, it's a very similar thing, so I totally relate to what's going on now.
I'm desperate to carry on this conversation to think about how that then feeds into the secondary market and then knockoffs as well, Susan, but we are totally out of time. And so I hope this can be a discussion that carries on over wine and wandering around in the galleries. I can't tell you how grateful we are for your time. Thank you all for being with us today. Thank you.